What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Weekend Roundup here on Touchline Talk. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content going up on the channel. So much to cover. And before I jump into specifics, I want to begin with a larger overarching point here with so many important things happening this weekend and this season coming to a close for most European leagues. If you would have told somebody at the beginning of this season, Liverpool would have won the Premier League, Napoli would have won Serie A, Arsenal would have won the Women's Champions League, Inter would have made the Champions League on the men's side, and you could probably throw a couple more things in there as well. Sunderland would be back in the Premier League. Manchester City would have struggled and had to fight till the very last day to even qualify for the Champions League. Who would have believed that? And so we're going to get into all of these things specifically. But this season was a really good reminder that you can't assume anything. Nothing is inevitable. And that's what makes this sport fun, and that's why you have to play the games. And so I just hope as we go into next season and the narratives start to begin, and obviously it's going to take a little bit different shape in the Premier League with what happened to Manchester City. But just moving forward, don't forget that this season happened, that 2015-16 Leicester happened. You can point to other Bayer Leverkusen last season. Of course, it's not expected, it's not common, but it is possible, and it happens. And so we had some really, really cool stories this season, and I wanted to take a minute to celebrate that before we kind of get into the more specifics of all of these. So, starting with Napoli, Serie A, and what happened Friday in Italy to give Serie A to Napoli as they edge out Inter Milan. The games themselves, not too much to really dive into. They were comfortable wins for both teams at the end of the day against inferior opposition. But the idea that Scott McTominay and Romelu Lukaku scored the goals, that Scott McTominay scored the goal that ultimately clinched the title, was named Serie A's MVP. And you look at this Napoli team versus the team that won a couple seasons ago. Yes, of course, there are still some names there. There are obviously a core group of players that have remained. But the best players from that team are not here. Kvicha Kvaratskhelia played the first half of the season, but then they sold him in the middle of a title race. Antonio Conte, based on what he has said and the way he was talking, didn't even think this was possible until they started actually doing it. And to me, the story of the previous team was they were just way better than anybody realized, right? We didn't know who Victor Osimhen and Kvicha Kvaratskhelia were at the beginning of that season. They weren't part of the global conversation about the sport. And Osimhen's had a weird journey since, but look at where Kvaratskhelia is. He's getting ready to play in a Champions League final. They were just so much better than anybody realized. And they dominated the league. This team is not that. This is Antonio Conte finding ways to win Serie A no matter what team he's with. It's relying on players like Romelu Lukaku, who is coming off a fine season at Roma, but it's been a little while since he's kind of been on the global radar. He certainly was at Inter, and he just knows how to produce in this league. He had a phenomenal season, but nobody was talking about him as a difference maker on a title-winning team heading into this season. And Scott McTominay was, I have always believed and always will believe, incorrectly judged to be excess parts at Manchester United. But he comes in and completely redefines his legacy with what he did this season. Now you're talking about all these Premier League teams who might be interested in bringing him back. Different conversation whether that's a good idea or not. But this group didn't have the firepower and the superstar names, and they still found a way to do it. And it's not like the league was handed to them. The team that they edged out is going to play in the Champions League final. It's a remarkable story. It's very different than Napoli of 2 seasons ago, which makes it really cool. So congratulations, City of Naples, Napoli, absolutely incredible. They hold on, they take the lead, they hold on to it, and ultimately win another Scudetto. I then want to stay in the Champions League conversation before getting to some of the stuff in England and the Premier League. Because Arsenal stunned Barcelona to win the Women's Champions League. It wasn't a breathtaking performance. They conceded plenty of chances, plenty of possession. They did start the game well, which was really important. That they came out with a level of intensity and a level of focus that you went, okay, they're up for this. Doesn't mean they're actually going to win, but it looks like they're going to make this a game. And they're rising to the occasion. And then they have the goal chopped off for offside, and you go, oh, okay, there's continuing to build in confidence here. And eventually they do get the goal, and they just don't concede to Barcelona. There are a couple really important big picture things with this. The idea that a team that was not close to winning the WSL title can go and win the Champions League and beat that team to do so, and by the way, knock out Lyon in the round before, is a really big deal and a great sign for the women's game. That's the kind of stuff that happens on the men's side, right? Liverpool's done it. Chelsea's done it. Inter Milan might do it this season. You can go plenty other examples too of teams that you know they've got the talent and they're capable, but they're not the best team in their league. It's what makes the Men's Champions League fun, is that there are legitimately 10 or so teams, maybe even more than that some seasons, that feel like go in, feel like they have a real chance to win the competition. And that's not necessarily the case on the women's side. And this is part of the steps in the progression of continuing to grow the sport, is that you have to take Arsenal seriously in the Champions League. And they didn't just waltz to this. They beat the best teams in the world to do it. Wasn't pretty. Doesn't matter. And the other part of this is, and this is not to denigrate Arsenal. I mean, Blackstenius comes off the bench and scores the goal. Beth Mead comes off the bench, for crying out loud. That's your bench. They are obviously a really, really good team. But they're not Chelsea. They're not Barcelona. And they found a way to do this. So it's a remarkable story for that part of it, and kind of what it means for the women's game overall, that you're expanding the pool of teams that you have to believe are legitimate contenders heading into a season. That's always a good thing. The second part of this is the Barcelona side. And I talk about this a decent amount just because I find it fascinating. And I do feel like it's the biggest narrative in the women's game. You have all these Champions League finals they've played in. Okay, they beat Lyon once, lost twice. But they finally did, the next step was, can you actually beat Lyon in a final? I was very big on that they caught some breaks with the opponents they were playing in the final when they won. Now, still had to beat them, of course. But they needed to go through Lyon to really establish themselves as the top team in the sport. They do that. Spain wins a World Cup. Basically, Alexia Putellas hands off the baton to Tania Bonmati as the best player in the world. And there's a period about 2 years ago where you go, oh my goodness, they are clearly, Spain as a whole, not just the national team, but also on the club side, Spain are the standard bearer for the women's side of the sport. It's the same core players. Obviously, Barcelona have additions and some players have come and gone, but it's the same Spanish core that is at the heart of the national team, the heart of this Barcelona team. And they were clearly ahead of everybody else. They were the ones pushing the standard. And now you look at these past 2 years, and I know they did win last season. Again, did it against a team you expect them to beat. You then bow out in the Olympics, and you lose this game, which, to be fair, is the first time they've been upset in the final. But again, this wasn't Chelsea, this wasn't Lyon, this was Arsenal. They smashed Chelsea in the semis and then lost to an inferior team. That's no disrespect to Arsenal. That is just factually what happened. These teams play in the same league. You can compare them pretty easily. And so now we're to the point where in the past 2 years, since that World Cup, the players with the major international trophy, or in this case, the gold medals, right? The major international victory and the Champions League title are the U.S. internationals, and specifically Emily Fox, who was really good in this game, does not get enough credit because, for obvious reasons. Everybody loves talking about Naomi Girma. Everybody loves talking about Triple Espresso. Emily Fox is sensational. But it's back to the U.S. players being the ones who are winning the Champions League, winning the major international tournaments. And I find it fascinating going into this next cycle of major tournaments here. This Barcelona group has work to do to rebuild that reputation as the standard bearers. Of course they're great. I am not somebody who goes and destroys teams for losing one game. In a knockout tournament, when all the pressure's on you, I refuse to do that. But there was a point at the beginning where they couldn't beat the very best. And then they finally proved they could do it. And then they did on the international stage. And they were on the top of the world and there was nobody touching them. And since then, it's gone back in the other direction. So now you have this one really great period where they were clearly the class of the sport, sandwiched between two fairly disappointing eras. Now, of course, it's only 2 years. It's not like this is a major trend yet. But if they don't pick this back up soon, you're talking about that being sandwiched between two extended periods of time where if you are assuming this is the best country, best club, best international team in the world, they've been incredibly disappointing. I just find it fascinating. It's a really interesting story that just continues to have twists and turns, and it's never just as simple as they're not all that or they're every bit as good as that. It's a blend and it kind of ebbs and flows, and it's just really interesting. And the other part of it is you can't judge them on domestic success at all, right? It's Champions League and it's international competition because nobody is on their level in Spain. So it just creates this really, really interesting dynamic. But congratulations to Arsenal. This is a really, really cool story. Nobody would have expected this coming into the season. They beat the very best to do it. Absolutely deserve it. Congratulations to that entire team. Really, really cool thing to see. Moving on to the men's side in England, two important developments here. I will start with the end of the Premier League season. Obviously, there's not too much at stake here. Liverpool has already won the title. Great to see Trent Alexander-Arnold get a send-off that is much more in line with what he deserves than what he had been getting. But that was done. The relegation battle was done. It was about these Champions League spots and how Europe was going to play out. If you are Nottingham Forest and you see the way that this unfolded, where you know all you needed to do was win a home game, and all of the recent struggles, the kind of slipping and letting the Champions League out of your grasp would be gone. You had one game you needed to win because you got all the help you could possibly ask for. And you can't find a way to get it done. I mean, credit to Chelsea. They showed up, did what they needed to do, put themselves in a position with their really strong start to the season where their shaky form over the second half didn't hurt them too much because they had built that cushion and they regrouped at the end and got the job done. But everything that Forest, the past few weeks, it's been bumpy, messy, chaotic. They had the opportunity. It was right there, and Not only did they, it would be one thing if they had come, lost this game and then everybody else had won. So you went, well, we didn't even get the help we needed. But now you go into this season, this next season coming up here, and you go into the summer knowing that everything worked in your favor and you didn't do your part of it. And that is just a really, really tough reality to swallow if you're Nottingham Forest. Aston Villa also gifted the opportunity. Yes, there was the controversial disallowed goal. Yes, they got that wrong. It should have counted. However, they still lost by 2. Emi Martinez still excused himself from the game. I refuse to say that one moment determined anything. To me, the defining moment of the game was the red card. You still concede a really sloppy, kind of nasty penalty, a very clear-cut penalty after that to make it 2-0. I don't have a lot of sympathy for that call. Yes, it was wrong. But Aston Villa did not put themselves in a position to make it be about that. To me, it's about the other failures that it all snowballed together into this loss. But it's not some incredible injustice. It's not the reason they're not playing the Champions League. It's not. So congratulations to Newcastle, who Everton just seemed to find a way to win the final game of the season and do what they need to do, surviving relegation, whatever it might be. They get the job done. Newcastle don't, and it doesn't matter because they get the support they need from everybody else, so they will be playing in the Champions League as well. Ultimately, after all of these exciting teams and these teams that we're dreaming of, Nottingham Forest, Brighton, Fulham to a certain extent, that were dreaming of capitalizing on not having Tottenham and Manchester United in this equation, it's for the Big Six. It's Newcastle who get the spots. There isn't really a Cinderella. You thought it was going to be Nottingham Forest, and they just couldn't get the job done. Finally, and on another week, this would be probably the first thing I talk about, but there was just so many important developments. Sunderland are back in the Premier League. They beat Sheffield United in a game where they did very little for almost the entire 90 minutes. Sheffield United created chance after chance after chance. They eventually go ahead. You think it's pretty much done and dusted. You're kind of waiting for him to get a second goal just to see it out and finish it off. And it never comes. And Sunderland get their goal. And then your player in exile, who has already announced he's leaving, who's kind of the championship's version of Trent Alexander-Arnold, in the sense of, obviously different players, but in the sense of fans from that club want nothing to do with him. He comes and scores the goal that takes you back to the Premier League out of nowhere. It's a remarkable story with a really weird ending that is maybe kind of befitting of Sunderland and everything they've been through. It also makes me incredibly concerned for what is going to happen next season, because they are clearly not on the same level as Sheffield United. Yes, they won the game. That's the way it works. It is what it is. But the gap between the class of those two teams was abundantly clear. They are going to either have to accept right away that this is not a permanent thing. We're not even going to try and stay up. We're going to focus on the financial sustainability piece and prepare for the possibility that we go back down. Or they're going to have to overhaul this squad to be competitive next season. You saw the challenges that the Leicesters and Ipswiches had. You saw how bad Southampton were this season. And Sunderland are, to me, even a level below those teams coming up. It's amazing. There is plenty of work to do. I'm curious to see how ambitious they're going to be. The final thing I want to say about this, though, is that is a club that deserves, from a branding, popularity, historical perspective to be in the Premier League. And you're also getting Leeds back again, right? These, if you're just building the 20 biggest clubs in England, historically speaking, they are both easily in that top 20. And so it's going to be fun to have Sunderland back in the Premier League. There is something about these really big historical clubs when they come up that feels special and feels different, regardless of what the actual circumstances are. All three promoted teams have a really big task ahead of them. See what they can do. But it is Sunderland joining Burnley and Leeds United back in the Premier League for 25-26. That is all for this edition of the Weekend Roundup. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. I'll see you next time.